I am Robert Mujica, State Budget Director, and the Governor has designated me to chair today's meeting. I'd like to note that Doreen and Sarah, observer for Senate Majority Leader John Flanagan, is here. Mark Rozelle, observer for the City Council Leader Stephen Matteo, and Jay Lifton, observer for the Assembly Minority Leader Brian Cole, are also in attendance. So I'll now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the last annual board meeting, which was held on August 2nd, 2016. These minutes were previously distributed to the board. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
On that motion, we have to make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion accepted. The next item on the agenda is the financial plan for fiscal years 2018 through 2021. Mr. Mayor, I understand that you will present the city's four-year financial plan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you also in your capacity as State Budget Director for the work we've all been doing together on behalf of the people of the city and the state. I want to thank the members of this board, everyone, for the work you do on behalf of all of us. Appreciate the energy and time you put in. Especially want to acknowledge two indispensable partners in the work we do, our State Controller Tom DiNapoli and our City Controller Scott Stringer, and their staffs for all of their hard work. And particular thanks to the private members of this board, John Levin and Lawrence Golub, for what they do and the perspective they bring to the process. Thank you so much. And of course to Jeffrey Summer, the Acting Executive Director, thank you for years of working with New York City as we continue on a path of fiscal responsibility and effectiveness. I want to just note at the outset, obviously it's been a year, a lot has happened, but I'm always struck when I come to these meetings by the fact that they are so different than what happened in years past. And I'm particularly reflecting upon my experience last night. It was National Night Out Against Crime last night. It's the 34th year that's happened, and it was a very positive experience. I was in all 5 boroughs, and this was emblematic to me because this was an idea that started when New York City and cities around the country in the middle of crime waves, and now more and more celebrates the successful work of our police and our communities in fighting crime. I think there's a clear parallel here to the work of this board, which started in crisis and was absolutely essential to saving New York City from the fiscal crisis and putting us back on strong footing. With every passing year, there's always work to do, there's always challenges to guard against, but I think it's safe to say when we gather each year, we also get to acknowledge real progress and the kinds of things that all of our predecessors wished for this city. The kind of progress and the kind of stability that was once dreamed of is happening more and more in this city. So I want to update you on the choices we've been making in the last year, and particularly the strategic and targeted investments we've made in our budget that we believe are essential to helping New York City continue to grow and thrive and be economically strong and fiscally stable. And from the beginning, we've had a clear commitment to honest and responsible management of the city's finances. I've said many times that we can't achieve our goals related to a more equitable and inclusive city if we don't first take care of our fiscal reality. And I know our colleagues at the City Council have shared that view. And that has allowed us to create a sound financial basis for a progressive vision of governance. I want to update this board with some facts that the fiscal year 2018 adopted budget in its final version is $85.24 billion. Our 10-year capital strategy is $95.85 billion. And both the fiscal 2017 budget and the fiscal 2018 budget are balanced, and is a very positive sign about the state of our decision-making here in the city. The adopted budget was the earliest achieved in a quarter century, pointing out to a greater and greater consensus between the mayor's office and the city council in terms of core principles that we want to act on in our budget process. There was a tremendous amount of partnership and an absence of rancor, and we were able to achieve an early and balanced budget. Now, I have to say, I think this is something that New Yorkers care about a lot and want to see. They want to see their leaders be careful and prudent, and I want to say, but both on the executive side and the legislative side, there's been a devotion to projecting revenue estimates that are careful and cautious, and to increasing our reserves in everything we do. And that's been a pattern throughout the budget processes of the last 4 years. I want to thank the members of my team who have done extraordinary work taking these principles and putting them into action. Of course, our first Deputy Mayor, Tony Shores, and my Budget Director, Dean Foulihan, and their teams. They have been the ones who did the hard work of taking these ideas and bringing them to life. I want to give you now, Mr. Chairman, a broad overview of the City of New York's financial health, and I'm happy to say it continues to be extremely strong. There's a lot of good news when it comes to our economy overall. Jobs in the city have grown at a historic pace. In fact, more than 340,000 new jobs were created in New York City between the beginning of 2014 and the end of 2016. So in that 3-year period, 340,000 new jobs. To give you perspective, that is more than the entire population of St. Louis, Missouri. Our unemployment rate today stands at just 4.4%, close to a 40-year low. And the unemployment rate is roughly half of what it was when this administration began in January of 2014. And very importantly, we're seeing economic growth across all 5 boroughs. We sought an inclusive approach to economic development, and we're seeing that come into being. Brooklyn, in fact, is leading the way with 16.7% private sector job growth since 2013. Interestingly as well, and this is certainly pertinent to the dynamics that existed when this board was first founded and did so much to save this city, our economy today is so different, so much more diverse, and our economy is increasingly less reliant on Wall Street and the financial industry, which now accounts for 18.1% of the city's wages, down from over 25% before the Great Recession, so just about a decade ago. Our workforce, like our economy, is becoming stronger and more diverse. And this is very pertinent to the moment in history that we're living through, and I think New York City provides an object lesson to those who are trying to understand the role of immigrants in our economy. Anyone who argues that immigrants have a negative impact on economic development should come to New York City and see our example. Over half of our business owners are immigrants, and 45% of our labor force is made up of foreign-born workers, up from 31% in 1990. And we continue to be more prosperous, more unified in so many ways across our neighborhoods, and certainly safer as well. So there's ample reason to be positive about our economy, but there are serious reasons for caution at the same time. And this, Mr. Chairman, was very much on our minds in the budget process. In keeping with our commitment to an honest and responsible approach to budgeting, we have reduced our revenue estimates for fiscal year 2018 by $416 million since the Financial Control Board meeting last year. We've also taken into account the deep uncertainty we face at the federal level, and I think that nicely written sentence only begins to express the dynamics we all watch in Washington, D.C. Deep uncertainty is an understatement. We're working every day with members of the Senate and the House, with our Washington office of the City of New York, with other cities' offices in New York, with the business community, labor community, healthcare community. We're working with all of them to try and monitor and act on developments that occur at the White House and in the Congress. We can all agree it's been a roller coaster and an ever-changing situation. But one thing I can note is that, in particular, mayors around the country have worked together in a bipartisan manner to try and address some of these challenges in Washington, try and influence our senators and members of Congress to respect and understand the crucial role our cities play in our economy. But that being said, there are huge challenges. There are proposed drastic cuts in the budget proposal that came from the White House. And obviously, we see a desire in the House of Representatives in particular for major cuts to some of the areas of funding most important to New York City and other cities. And there continue to be efforts to repeal or undermine the Affordable Care Act. Despite the activity in the last days, we know that this issue remains quite live, and there are many twists and turns ahead in the road. The impact on this city is extraordinary, knowing that as many as 1.6 million New Yorkers are in danger of losing their health insurance if the Affordable Care Act were repealed, and that has massive ramifications for the ability of people in this city to be healthy, but also for our budget, including the budget for our public health care system. In addition, there are many proposed major cuts to funding for services New Yorkers depend on. That includes cuts that are in the proposed House plan that would undercut the way that so many New Yorkers get food for their families, get affordable health care, and get income security. This includes the SNAP program, WIC, TANF, Medicaid, and Medicare. All of them could sustain major cuts in the next few months, and we had to take that into account and will continue to in our budget process. So we know that we have to be ready for any eventuality coming out of Washington, and so we prepared with that in mind. Our cautious revenue and debt projections and manageable out-year gaps are consistent with the current economic situation and with our ongoing commitment to setting aside unprecedented reserves and to finding additional savings. We've achieved the highest level of general reserves of any administration in city history, $1.2 billion in fiscal 18 alone, and $1 billion annually in fiscal years 19 through 21, compared to the traditional level of $300 million. Working with the City Council, we established the first ever capital stabilization reserve. It's now at $250 million each year over the 4-year financial plan. And that is in addition to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust Fund, which is at a record high now of $4.2 billion. Of that figure, $3.4 billion is a result of actions taken by our administration working with our partners in the City Council. It's important to note that we have contributed to the Retiree Health Benefits Trust every single year of my administration, something no other administration has done before. Our total reserves for fiscal year 2018 now stand at $5.65 billion, the highest ever achieved in our city's history. Under this administration, our city has continued to receive the highest credit ratings in our history. Obviously, those two facts are related. Rating agencies have cited our commitment to setting aside unprecedented reserves as a big reason for our strong ratings. Now, as we build record-setting reserves, I've been clear we must continue to find new savings through steps like overtime control, using physical space more efficiently, and procuring goods and services more effectively. We had $1 billion in savings in November, another $1.1 billion in January, and $700 million at the executive budget across fiscal years 2017 and 18, and nearly $400 million more at adoption in June. Our health care agreement with the Municipal Labor Committee will result in an additional $1.3 billion in health care savings in fiscal 18, and will, we believe, at the same time result in better care for the people who work for New York City. We've also implemented a partial hiring freeze for certain managerial and administrative staff. This will result in $100 million in savings without affecting the core functions of government or our priorities for helping the people in New York City. To continue achieving savings and efficiencies, I've directed OMB to find new savings for the upcoming November financial plan update. Now, as we manage our resources and we keep an eye on the evolving economic landscape and certainly events in our nation's capital, we are constantly investing at the same time to make this a better and fairer city for all. I just want to talk very briefly about some of the most important investments we're making. We've invested in unquestionably our most precious resource, our children and their futures. And this year we set our city on a course to provide full-time, high-quality early childhood education for every 3-year-old in the city of New York whose family wants and needs it. We will spend $36 million in the next school year, ramping up to $177 million by the school year starting in 2020 to achieve this goal. Now, we know this is a tremendously effective investment. An MIT study found that every dollar invested in quality early education saves taxpayers as much as $13 in public education, criminal justice, and welfare costs. And 3K for All is part of a larger vision for our schools called Equity and Excellence that seeks to fundamentally improve our school system. We have a lot more to do on that front, to say the least. But we are seeing some historic success. Graduation rates are at an all-time high. Dropout rates are at an all-time low. Now, another crucial question, the one I hear most from New Yorkers, is the question of how we address the affordability crisis, particularly the affordable housing crisis in this city. Our fiscal 2018 budget fights this crisis on two important fronts. First, we're making a wide variety of investments in affordable housing, including $1.9 billion of capital funds to set aside 10,000 affordable apartments within our housing plan for those who need them most: seniors, veterans, and low-income New Yorkers. We are also continuing to make needed investments to support the 400,000 New Yorkers who live in our public housing buildings, and legal assistance for every tenant facing eviction and housing court. Another crucial front, we're investing in a plan to create 100,000 good-paying jobs for this city over the next decade. This includes a $136 million capital investment to create a Made in New York campus in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. That will be home to 1,500 good jobs when it opens in 2020. This is the kind of investment we believe will help to ensure our economic strength and the growing diversity of our economy going forward. Obviously, everything we do has to be undergirded by keeping the city safe and making it safer. We can't have an effective economy, we can't have good schools, we can't do any of the things we seek to do if we don't have a safe city. And we're investing to ensure that America's safest big city is, in fact, safer than ever going forward. We're giving the police even more tools and more training to achieve that. Examples include $6.9 million to deepen our efforts to combat domestic violence, and $700,000 investment to expand the use of ShotSpotter, a cutting-edge tool that allows police to pinpoint where gunfire is taking place, which has been extraordinarily helpful in stopping violence and finding perpetrators. Also, and this is a very sad reality, this city and in cities all around the country and rural areas as well, we're all confronting the opioid crisis and the plague of lethal overdoses. We've initiated a new plan, Healing NYC, a $38 million initiative to reduce opioid deaths by 35% over the next 5 years. This is a very, very tough challenge, but we believe we can make a big difference with these investments. To conclude, I want to thank the Financial Control Board, as always, this generation and the generations before, for helping New York City to be strong. Our administration has been guided by very clear values related to fiscal responsibility, transparency, and fairness. 3.5 years into this administration, we are proud to say we have a proven record of disciplined and effective fiscal and programmatic management. And you can see in the strategic investments we've made, they are all focused on keeping the city safe, keeping the economy growing, and making sure it is inclusive. We know the savings that we have demanded and found from our agencies are essential to this mission, as are the historic reserves we have set aside. And we know that these investments ultimately change the lives of New Yorkers for the better and make this city all it should be for our people. There's a lot more work to be done, but we believe New York City is on a path to be stronger and fairer for the long term. And I thank you again and all the efforts of all the members of the board that have helped us to move forward and will help us in the future to be a stronger city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Controller DiNapoli, do you have any comments on the city's financial plan?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for your report to this board. I'm joined by Ken Bleiweiss, our Deputy Controller for New York City. We have distributed to the members of the board our review of the financial plan of the City of New York. I'd like to offer the following comments for the record. The city ended fiscal year 2017 with a surplus of $4.2 billion, which is the largest since 2008. The surplus, which was used to balance the 2018 budget, resulted from unneeded reserves and a citywide savings program. Although the fiscal year 2018 budget is balanced, the city projects budget gaps of $3.5 billion in 2019, $2.8 billion in 2020, and $2.3 billion in 2021. The gaps are still relatively small as a share of city fund reserves, averaging 4.3%, and are manageable under current conditions. Moreover, the budgets for these years include annual reserves of $1.25 billion. If not needed, the reserves could be used to narrow the projected gaps. Despite the favorable outlook, a number of trends deserve close watching. For example, tax collections have slowed. Last year, collections slowed to an estimated growth rate of 1.8%, with non-property taxes declining for the first time since fiscal year 2010. Job creation has slowed as the labor market has tightened. The city is on pace to add 70,000 jobs in 2017, compared with 86,000 last year and an average of 28,000 in each of the 2 prior years. The current job expansion, which is already the largest on record, will also be the longest on record by the end of 2017. The city's 4-year financial plan assumes that the expansion will continue without interruption. With each passing year, however, the likelihood of an economic setback grows because changes in the business cycle are inevitable. City-funded spending, adjusted for reserves and savings from prior payables, is projected to rise by 5.8% in fiscal year 2018, considerably faster than inflation. Notwithstanding these trends, potential changes in federal fiscal policies present the greatest risk to the city's financial outlook. The city is counting on $7.8 billion in federal aid in fiscal year 2018, representing more than 9% of the operating budget. The President's proposed budget is just the first step in the budget process, but it offers clues to the programs most at risk. The proposal focuses heavily on cuts to social safety net and non-defense discretionary programs. My staff estimates that the President's budget would reduce federal funding to the city's operating and capital budgets by $827 million in the current fiscal year. In addition, Congress continues to debate health care and Medicaid funding to the states. The Health and Hospitals Corporation, the largest municipal hospital system in the nation, already faces serious financial challenges. Changes in federal health care policies could further complicate its financial outlook. Given these risks, the city has prudently increased the general reserve to a record $1.2 billion in fiscal year 2018 and has set aside $250 million in the Capital Stabilization Reserve. It has also replenished the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which now has a record balance of nearly $4.2 billion. The mayor's indication that the city will identify additional agency savings will provide added budget flexibility. To sum it up, the city's economy is strong, the fiscal year 2018 budget is balanced, and the city has unfettered access to the credit markets. I certainly want to commend Mayor de Blasio, City Controller Stringer, and their staffs, the City Council, for a job well done. Thank you for the opportunity to offer these comments.
Thank you, Controller DiNapoli. City Controller Stringer, would you like to make any comments on the city's financial plan?
Yes, I will. I am honored to join Mayor de Blasio and Controller DiNapoli and you, Director Mojica, and members of the staff of the Financial Control Board and its members. I'm joined by President Niblick, our Deputy Controller for Budget, and our first Deputy Controller, Elena Gilligo. Let me make some comments on the budget. First, I want to say that I'm pleased to be with so many New Yorkers who understand that the stakes for this city have never been higher. Our shared belief in an open and diverse society that cares for our most vulnerable people is now under attack on a daily basis. And I'm proud to say that each of our offices has worked diligently and together to shed light on the human costs of the policies coming out of Washington. We're grappling with immigration restrictions, unacceptable reversals in health care coverage potentially, as well as dismantling our social safety net. And we have had some initial success, but we must continue to fight back against a vision of tax breaks for wealthy people and service cuts for working families. The good news is, despite these challenges at the national level, New York City's economy is strong. My office recently put out a report that found payroll employment in the city is 14% higher than before the recession in 2008. That's more than 500,000 additional people working in New York City. Our unemployment rate is the lowest since we began collecting modern statistics, and our labor force participation rate is the highest. I want to commend Mayor de Blasio for continuing to identify budget savings to build up our reserves and prepare for the inevitable rainy day. In the last fiscal year, the city identified $6.6 billion in total savings through fiscal year 2021 under the citywide savings program. Our office also continues to work together to identify debt service savings. Together, we have achieved $678 million in budgetary savings over the last 4 years from bond financing. The mayor has now added to the city's budget cushion for 4 straight years. At the beginning of FY 2018, the budget cushion, as measured by my office, stood at $9.8 billion, or 11.1% of adjusted spending. This approaches the 12% threshold we have previously recommended. We believe we can reach this threshold with a continued focus on finding efficiencies in government service. While identifying new savings in the adopted budget, the mayor was also able to secure new resources to invest in our people and our safety net, beginning and including making housing more affordable for our seniors, expanding access to council and housing court, investing in our youth through new school construction, broadband access, air conditioning in schools, and expanded after-school opportunities, and making our city safer through Vision Zero and the addition of school crossing guards at every crossing. Overall, our office's assessment of the city's adopted budget financial plan finds that the out-year gaps are manageable. The administration has prudently forecast conservative revenue estimates going forward. As such, our office expects additional revenues over the plan, with budgeted reserves of $1.45 billion in FY 2018 and $1.25 billion in each of the out years. Closing the gaps in FY 2019 and beyond should be achievable. And finally, I am pleased to report that based on our preliminary estimate, our pension funds produced returns of 12.95% in FY 2017, significantly above our actuarial target of 7%. Working together with the mayor and the boards of our city employee retirement systems, we've achieved a compound rate of 7.4% over the last 4 fiscal years, slightly above our long-term expected return of 7%. My office projects that last year's performance will reduce pension contributions by more than $800 million over the financial plan period. Now, while this is certainly good news, we should remember that our investment focus remains on the long term, and the markets may be more challenging in the years to come. And that's why today, while our local economy is strong, we must continue to tackle some of the city's greatest challenges: affordability, homelessness, and investment in our aging transportation infrastructure. And only when we address these issues together will our city truly will be able to move forward and thrive as it always has. So I look forward to working with all of you. I do want to commend the mayor, Dean Foulahan, Tony Shores, because the collaboration and the conservative approach to financial planning has definitely given us the cushion that we're definitely going to need in the years to come. So, Mr. Mayor, congratulations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, City Controller. I will now call on Jeff Summer, the board's acting executive director, to present the staff's comments.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, a review of fiscal year 2018 to 21 financial plan and the adopted budget shows the city continues to follow a successful strategy of conservative revenue estimates and large reserves to ensure budget balance. The city was able to manage the fiscal 2017 budget in a way that built up a surplus of almost $4.2 billion, which was used to prepay fiscal 2018 expenses. The surplus was mainly built on higher revenues, the takedown of unnecessary reserves, and the quarterly implementation of agency savings programs. The 2018 adopted budget projects city fund revenues to increase by $1.2 billion for moderate growth of 1.9% compared to fiscal 2017. Growth in the property tax continues strong, while moderate growth in non-property taxes are partially offset by projected reductions in tax audits and miscellaneous revenues. In fiscal 2018, on the expenditure side, just under $1.2 billion in new spending was added. This included City Council initiatives, funding for the expansion of pre-kindergarten and the launch of pre-K for 3-year-olds, and the increased costs in homeless programs and debt service. In addition, the city increased the general reserve to $1.2 billion and maintains a $250 million capital stabilization reserve. There is no projected surplus to help close deficits in fiscal years 2019 to 21. In fiscal 2018, the challenge for the city is how to manage the year so that a surplus similar in size to past years can be produced. Our review of the city's projections finds them mostly reasonable and achievable. We have some concern that there could be a shortfall in the business taxes that might be offset by increased miscellaneous revenue. Without a boom in tax revenues, the city will have to find other ways to build the surplus. The high level of reserves, if not needed, will be helpful. We expect and recommend that the city continues the quarterly process of developing and implementing agency savings programs to help build the surplus. To the extent these actions have recurring value, the out-year gaps will be easier to close. While projecting a balanced fiscal 2018 budget, the financial plan shows manageable budget gaps of $3.5 billion in 19, $2.8 billion in 20, and $2.3 billion in 21, while maintaining a general reserve of $1 billion and $250 million capital stabilization reserves in each of these fiscal years. Total revenues increased by 9.8% over the 4 years of the financial plan, with city-funded revenues growing 13.1%. This is a cautious plan warranted by an uncertain economic environment in which national economic growth has been halting despite stronger business profits. Meanwhile, total fund expenditures are projected to grow 12.6% over the 4-year period of the financial plan. Expenditure growth is being driven largely by debt service costs, fringe benefits, salaries, and wages. Our identifiable risks are manageable and cover mainly concerns over the business taxes and uniformed overtime spending. Even these risks will likely be offset by higher pension investment earnings. After 2 years of dismal investment returns for last year are projected to reach about 13%. Phasing in the higher earnings will offset risk in fiscal 19 by $141 million, growing to $423 million by fiscal 2021. While the known risks are historically minor, the great unknown risks of what actions may be taken by the federal government are still of concern. What, if any, changes due to health care reform, tax reform, or federal budget cuts could affect the city's financial plan are unknown. Medicaid reductions would affect the city directly, as well as health and hospitals. Removing tax reductions for state and local taxes would affect the local economy. It is still very uncertain what, when, and if any actions will be taken. With that in mind, the city is wise to continue forecasting conservatively, building up large surpluses, and developing and implementing agency savings programs with recurring impact. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Summers. I'd like to ask the private members if they have any comments on the city's financial plan.
Yes. I've been designated to speak.
Mr. Levin?
I will do so, thank you. I'll make a professional statement at the end. I'll make a small, very brief personal statement, if I may. On behalf of the two private members, I would like to comment on the city's fiscal condition. Mr. Mayor, we agree with the praise and concern the staff and other members of the board have expressed today. The city's continued use of conservative revenue forecasts and interest rate assumptions on its debt, together with the agency savings program, has created surpluses which have aided in continued budget balance. In fiscal year 2017, a surplus of over $4.1 billion was created and helps balance fiscal year 2018. The challenge for the city in the face of reduced tax revenue forecasts is to continue to manage the budget in a way that allows for the generation of large surpluses. If large surpluses cannot be created in fiscal 2018, the increased spending projected in 2019 may have to be reduced. In the short run, the major risk to the city's finances is the yet unknown effect of actions in Washington may have. Proposals for health care reform, including cuts in Medicaid, as well as other reductions in federal aid, could have negative impact on the city's budget. In addition, tax reform proposals that may reduce deductions for state and local taxes could impact the city's economy. With that in mind, the city is prudent to maintain reserves totaling $1.45 billion in fiscal 2018 and $1.25 billion in each of the out years of the plan. For the long term, however, we remain concerned about the large unfunded liabilities in both pensions and retiree health care benefits. After 2 years of way below expected investment earnings, this year exceeded expectations and will help ease the city's short-term burden. However, the pension system remained funded at only 65.6%, leaving the unfunded liability at $64.8 billion. We understand that the city has plans to close this gap over many years. As it relates to retiree health benefits, after a 2-year period of the unfunded liability dropping, primarily due to health care savings achieved in the last round of collective bargaining, which was a very welcome development, the unfunded liability has grown to $89.4 billion as of June 30th, 2016. Mr. Mayor, You deserve credit for achieving these healthcare savings as well as restoring the funding of the Retiree Healthcare Benefits Trust in each year of your administration. The trust now holds a record $4.2 billion. However, we continue to believe that more needs to be done. As we have in the past, we continue to urge you to create a formal process as opposed to the current ad hoc one that would set a minimum funding level for every year to be added to the trust. Given the size of the recent surpluses, the amount of funding level should be significantly higher than it has been. We have had discussions with the budget director on different ways to achieve this and wish to continue these discussions. In addition, we fully support your efforts in the next round of collective bargaining to achieve additional healthcare savings and to reduce the growth in this area. We believe these efforts are essential for the long-term fiscal health of the city. Thank you for allowing us to comment. I have two brief comments. As a public member, I want to express the extraordinary benefit that we have from Acting Director Summers. Professionalism, his knowledge, his availability, extraordinary knowledgeable man. And secondarily, separate from his administrative things, I personally rely on his judgment, and he has quite a favorable judgment of what you, sir, and others have done. So I view this. Secondly, I would like briefly to acknowledge, as I said to Tom, and I know Scott, and Mr. Mayor, you've all said some important things, and I just think in general, it's hard to plan, but we all assume economic and investment linearity within a broad box of some kind. And I think we are in a kind of environment where you might get less linearity or more non-linearity than we might think. I think in your positions, it's almost impossible to plan for that. But I do think it's worth occasionally looking in the mirror and thinking about it.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Mr. Mayor, do you have any comments or want to
Yes,
respond to these comments?
just a brief few responses. That last point I want to affirm strongly. I think we're in a non-linear time in history. And I certainly think the events of the last few months are about as non-linear as it gets. And that is true of, first and foremost, the dynamic in Washington, but I think you're right also to expand that out to the ever-changing dynamics of the stock market and of the economy overall. We're all trying to understand as policymakers what changing technology, automation, et cetera, what is all this going to do to our workforce and what it's going to do to the demands placed on government. There's a number of issues in flux. So I think my way of saying it would be affirming you. We should not get too comfortable. We should constantly be questioning our assumptions and be prepared to be agile in response to very quickly changing events. I want to also affirm we are devoted to a series of things. I think respond to several of the comments. We're absolutely devoted to adding savings consistently in general. And we believe, I think everyone here would unite everyone around the table, is we've all watched government closely. The day when government is perfectly efficient and has no more savings available, someone call me that day. I don't think I'll ever get that phone call. We know it's work that will go on for years and decades to constantly perfect this work, and there's therefore the upside of that is there are always more savings and efficiencies to be achieved. I think in terms of the healthcare dynamic, we've all known that we have to figure out long-term solutions around pension costs. We all agree on that, and we think there are some big efforts that we're working with the controllers on and are devoted to for the long term, but we also, I think, honestly would acknowledge the area we can have more impact on more quickly is healthcare costs for public employees. I think the last agreement was very affirming to me that there, again, is much more where that came from. There's a willingness from our labor partners to think creatively. They understand this is about the long-term fiscal health of the city. They understand that if they want government to be effective, we have to keep finding healthcare savings. And I think there's a surprisingly strong atmosphere of partnership compared to sort of what the assumptions were previously. I think everyone has become sober together about the fact that we have to do a lot more on that front, and it is available to us. So, and on the reserves, I understand your point and appreciate your point about different ways we might go about it, particularly in terms of the retiree reserve, but I'm going to argue the point where I think we all have a common ground is our goal is to keep adding. We understand the challenge and we don't want to look away from it. So our goal is to keep adding. I think the uncertainty point to some extent makes it hard to lock into a particular formula. Maybe, you know, I think a lot of us would have expected at this moment, if we had this good economic news, we could be thinking about some long-term structural reforms. We did not see the curveball of the November 8th election. So I would argue the prudent course is we have to see what the reality is in Washington, certainly through this budget cycle, through the tax reform, and I agree 100% there's a tremendous danger around the potential ending of deductibility for state and local taxes. That's a huge X factor in this equation. So I would argue we need at least this next year to understand what that Washington dynamic is. But rest assured, we are devoted to increasing reserves every year, and we believe that's going to be possible for the foreseeable future. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I will now call on Jeff Summer to report on the staff's findings regarding 2017 and the recommendations concerning the resolution we have before us.
I'd like to just review briefly the 5 conditions that would require the board, if any of them occurred, to decide whether to make a recommendation of whether a control period needed to be reimposed. The first condition is the city shall have incurred a deficit in excess of $100 million in the result of operations. The city has ended fiscal 2017 subject to final audit with a surplus of almost $4.2 billion and has prepaid fiscal 2018 expenses. The next 3 conditions are the city shall have failed to pay principal or interest on any of its notes or bonds when due or payable. The city shall have issued notes in violation of restrictions on short-term borrowing set forth in Section 9B of the Act. And the 4th one, the controllers shall have jointly certified that they could not, on the basis of facts existing at the time of such certification, make the joint certification required to terminate a control period. Simply put, both controllers have to say that there's sufficient market access for the city to sell its notes and bonds. The city has paid all principal and interest on its notes and bonds and has not violated any of the short-term borrowing provisions of the FEA. I have also received letters from the state and city controllers informing me that they do not see any likelihood that they would have reason to issue a joint certification relating to market access. And the last condition is the city shall have violated any provisions of the Act, and such violation substantially impairs the ability of the city to pay principal or interest on its bonds or notes when due and payable, or the city's ability to adopt or adhere to a balanced operating budget. The city has not violated any provisions of the Act. The staff therefore recommends that the board approve a resolution determining that as of August 2nd, 2017, none of the events which would have required the imposition of a control period has occurred, nor is there a substantial likelihood and imminence of such occurrence, and that the city is not experiencing fiscal stress that would jeopardize the orderly functioning of the city's fiscal affairs.
Thank you. Do we have any comments? No? I'll now entertain a motion to adopt the resolution and the determination. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion approved. Now entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second. All right, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Tight ship.